Hey everyone. So today we are going to deep dive into one of the toughest parts of putting on a virtual or really any kind of event. That's right, we're focusing on sponsorships. I'm really pleased and honored to have Will Curran on the show to share his expertise with us. So thank you, Will, for coming on. Will is the founder of Endless Events, a nationwide event technology, AV, and event production company. Over the last 15 years, he's helped brands share their messages with thousands of attendees and has helped keep the bar high for event tech experiences. You can watch Will sharing event industry knowledge and listen to him on the Event Icons and Event Tech podcasts. Today, we're going to be just deep diving into what sponsors are looking for when they consider partnering with you for your virtual event. We're going to also talk a bit about hybrid events. That's going to be really cool. And specifically the steps that you can take to land them, what they're looking for, and everything associated with that. So if you're watching here live, please feel free to write in any questions. We'll definitely go through them. Will, thanks so much for joining and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Rob. I'm honored to be here. Big fan of you guys, and excited to hopefully share some knowledge bombs for the audience that is hanging out on the interwebs.
Knowledge bombs, I love it. So, briefly, if anybody doesn't know who you are and your background, what are the highlights as it pertains to your journey from high school DJ to here?
Yeah. So most people don't know that I started and what became Endless now, 13 and a half or 14, almost 14 years ago when I was 17 in high school. Started as a DJ, like I think a lot of people who get into event technology, then grew to wanting to do bigger events with DJing mixed in with big production elements, and then wanted to then realize that like no one wanted to pay for DJs. This is like when the decline of kind of like paying good money to go see a DJ, was kind of going down. And basically was like, hey, well, this production element was where all of our revenue was and also where our clients found the value in. And they said, hey, I like how you simplify all this stuff. So we made the pivot into production, like a lot of people who start off as DJs. But then eventually as time went on, we realized that when it came to production, it's not just about the lights and the sound and the staging, but it's about this whole technological experience and the same problems people were having with AV in production they were having with event technology, trying to think out what apps do I need, what internet do I need, all that sort of elements that go in technology, especially as technology is growing more and more intertwined with events. We basically made that pivot more into the technology side. And naturally, a pandemic rages out and everyone has to go online. And because we were so focused on technology, a lot of people turned to us and say, hey, how do we incorporate this technology? Instead of being the thing that everyone tacked in on the end, it became the thing that everyone came to us first. And so very much so over these last, a couple years, or not couple years, it feels like a couple years of 2020, we basically been focusing on how do we take and build a strategic decision in what technologies people are using, what does that experience look like, and what are all the other things? How can you activate sponsorships? How can you, think about the attendee user experience? How do you, create great content as well? Is kind of intertwined. So very much, we've gone from being the thing people thought about last to being the thing that we have to work on first. And yeah, it's basically our journey. And yeah, a little bit of highlight stuff is that mainly been focusing on education. We're really well known for just trying to educate as much as possible. And, my life's mission is to add value as much as possible. And I think the thing that comes with that is just making sure that we think strategically about events, thinking about what trends that people have to be aware of. And yeah, that's essentially what my story is in a nutshell.
So I love that there are a whole bunch of things that you said there that have gotten my at least very slow moving cogs turning. One was about the importance of content, about the importance of experience. And I think that from a sponsorship side, I know that's like the area that we'd like to deep dive on today. That a lot of times when people are starting out in certainly running virtual events, especially if they haven't run events before, they're often starting out cold, but completely cold. They might not have ever thought about sponsorships. They might not have ever thought about what value means from a sponsorship perspective. They might even not have a lot of marketing experience. And sometimes it's presented in this very overly simplistic, but also like mysterious way. This idea of sponsorships. How much do you charge? What do you give them? There are these magical entities that apparently are out there that are willing to give you $100,000 to slap their logo on your page. So why can't I get those? A lot of these, maybe not overtly, but at least undercurrents of feelings that sponsorship is like a quick way to make a buck. And so I'd love to hear you slap that down, but also talk a little bit about like getting in the mind of a sponsor or getting in the mind of thinking about sponsorship. What are the first things you should be considering?
Yeah, so I think, like you said, first thing is that it's going to be a lot harder. Like, assume it's going to be an uphill battle, and that you're going to need a team or like a specialist or somebody who's really thinking about this sort of thing. If you're planning the whole user experience and all these other things like that, like you can't just expect to also then be like, yeah, we're also going to bring in $300,000 in sponsorships. And I learned this the hard way when I was in college. We had an event called the Undie Run. It was like an event where everyone came, took their clothes off, and donated to charity, ended up becoming like the largest clothing donation event in the state of Arizona at the time. And, but the big thing that we needed was sponsorships because it was a college event. We didn't charge for it, and we wanted to do these crazy cool stages and stuff. Well, the thing what we thought is like, oh yeah, we'll get these great big sponsorships. And actually, when you nail your first big one, you're going to want to get really excited. You're going to be like, we can totally get more like this. But it's not as easy as that. Sometimes your first big one might be more of like you got it through a relationship or, let's be honest, luck in a lot of ways. But I think we learned the hard way over the years is that you might have the coolest event that has tons of press that you're going to put their logos everywhere. And still, it's always going to be an uphill battle in terms of the sponsorships because you're never selling to, a person. And that's where, like, sometimes I say that luck in relationships comes in, is that you have to realize that you're selling to a company, and that company has multiple decision makers and multiple people deciding, like, are we actually going to put our money towards this? And especially right now, people are thinking really critically about, tightening up their purse strings to figure out, hey, what's actually going to drive the needle? The good news is, I'm hoping we can uncover a little bit today, is that in virtual, there are so many opportunities, and I think that you can easily align with a lot of what these companies are trying to do in the digital world in their digital marketing strategy for your events. So I know that didn't exactly answer your question, but
no, it did. It totally did. So before we dig into the kinds of things that you might want to think about, there was that mindset that I think you alluded to with your story about back in college. A lot of people who are creating projects, creating businesses, creating events, they are so in the weeds of that event. They are hopefully falling in love with the attendees that they're serving so that they're creating really, really good content, really engaging agenda. Sometimes, though, they maybe aren't necessarily successful at separating themselves from the embodiment of the event and thinking about it from the sponsor side. Like, what is it that they're looking for? Are there certain things, or maybe this is through examples or tactics, to try and get yourself inside the head of a sponsor so that you don't run into those mistakes of trying to over-explain things that are of absolutely no interest to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first thing you can do is think extremely critically. Like, why should they care? What's really in it for them? Where could they spend this money better, right? So, for example, if your sponsorship's $10,000, hey, could they just take that money and dump it into Facebook ads and get way more return on business? Okay, no, that's not possible because you have a super duper niche audience and things like that. Cool, now you're starting to think a little bit more critically. But I think far too often, event professionals like to think in sponsorship in terms of what's in it for me, the money I get, the prestige of having your logo on our site, all those things like that. But in reality, you need to think about what's in it for them and what's really going to drive the needle for them in terms of what they're trying to achieve. And I think one of the best things you can do is have a strategic conversation with your sponsors to say, hey, okay, what are your objectives as a business for the whole year? Not just like our event. Don't even worry. Even if you didn't do our event, I want to know what you're trying to achieve. Oh, you're trying to make an extra $1 million in sales this year? Okay, cool. Well, what are you guys going to do to do that? Okay, you're going to run Facebook ads. Okay, you're going to do this. Well, hey, how can we maybe intertwine and become a mix and a part of that strategy as a whole? but also that when you're starting to sell, instead of selling in terms of logo placement, sponsored speaking engagement, things like that, instead you speak in terms of the objectives. Hey, okay, so your objective is to get $1 million in revenue. You need to generate, 1,000 marketing qualified leads. I can help you generate those 500. And I think that, our audience is 2,000 people. I think at least a quarter of them are really qualified buyers for you. Let's become aligned in terms of your strategy to help you achieve that extra, 500 marketing qualified leads. Now you're not talking to them about, hey, okay, well, for logo, it's $500. For sponsor speaking engagement, it's $2,000. Instead, you're speaking about how your package, whatever you're going to do to align to them, is going to be completely aligned with their strategy.
It's a much more impactfully driven conversation rather than a kind of shallow. Everyone's familiar with the 5 whys. If you're thinking about this from a prestige aspect, and you're not willing to really go to the motivations of these sponsors, then you shouldn't really expect them to walk the journey for you, because it doesn't really give them an indication that you really know what they're looking for.
Absolutely. Yeah, you hit right nail on the head. I think that's perfect.
So I'd love to now get back to what kind of opportunities are there with virtual, especially since you've obviously come from the in-person event world as well, where not only sponsorships are massive, but there are a lot of different ways in which traditional events have allowed sponsors to at least have an awareness about what's available, and so that internally they can argue for different needles, to invest in to see which one moves. So what are some of the benefits or things that are available with virtual, or at least combining or adding virtual in, that you're seeing?
Definitely. And I love the audience to know. If you guys have ideas, feel free to post them in the comments and in the chat and let us know too. I want to see those comments flying all across. But I think there's so many opportunities when it comes to virtual events. So I have a little bit of a background in digital marketing too, because that's how we ended up growing our brand in a lot of ways. So I start to think really natively about, hey, instead of in-person interactions being the driver of the business, I really do think in terms of digital. So when this whole virtual thing kind of exploded from being 1% of the market to being now 100% of the market, I very much jumped all over this and said, hey, here's some cool ideas on how to do it. So yeah, I think one of the first things to look at when it comes to virtual digital events, whatever the heck you want to call it these days, is that think in terms of sponsorships, in terms of a digital marketing activation. And what do I mean by that? Well, don't reinvent the wheel. Like, everyone's like, well, I'm looking for the best, virtual event sponsorship ideas. I'm like, don't do that. Google top 10 digital marketing trends and see what everyone's talking about doing when it comes to their digital marketing, and then figure out how an event can do that. So I'll use this as an example. Everyone talks about multi-channel or omni-channel strategy. And for some people who don't do marketing stuff are like, wheels are spinning, like, oh no, now we're using jargon, oh gosh. No, it's super easy concept to understand. It's the idea that, like, when you create this piece of content, which we all know content is a great way to market, instead of just saying, hey, we're only gonna post it on our blog and that's the only place it's gonna live, or we're only gonna post it on LinkedIn, the idea is to take that piece of content and put it everywhere. So then that way you're on every channel, every place that you can be. So this is really important because there's so many social channels, so many ways that people consume information. For example, like, I read a lot of blogs through an RSS reader. Some people actually individually click the blogs. Some people like newsletters. Some people like get only their content through LinkedIn. Some people only get their content through Facebook, right? So you have to be where everybody else is. So you might be thinking, okay, well then how do I do that as an event? Well, here's how you can use that to drive sponsorship. So after your event, let's say, for example, you have a sponsored piece of content or event that happens or whatever it may be. Instead of saying, hey, that's only going to happen at my event, well, now with the virtual, we have the ability to record everything. So take that piece of content, repurpose it. So, turn it into, like, instead of an hour-long talk, turn it into little 20-second clips where, the person's saying the best quote or whatever it is, and taking a great snippet out of what they're talking about. But then repurpose that and then put it on all the channels, omni-channel it across the board. And you take that repurposed content and then you put it across all channels. Now you're taking a digital marketing trend and you're turning it into an asset for your event. Here's the best part. Now you can say, throw a logo in front of it and say, hey, part of that omni-channel strategy that we're going to blast this piece of snippet content. We're going to put, let's use Hey Summit as an example. Hey Summit at the bottom right of every single piece of content. And boom, now you guys are like, well, hey, I'm not just sponsoring one talk. I'm sponsoring tons of pieces of social media content across the board. So I think that's a big thing, is taking digital marketing tactics and then implementing them in the event as well. I'll use another example, since a lot of people are like, okay, that one seems a little bit more obvious. Let's pick something a little bit crazier. So let's talk about deep analytics, and I'll use the term micro analytics because I don't know what the exact term is marketing-wise for this. But for a long time, like on my marketing strategy, I always love when I have like big ticket, pricing items. Like if someone's going to hire us for an event, it's not necessarily like an easy $10 purchase for them to do it. So I really need to know, like when someone's on my site interacting with my content and they're potentially qualified, I want to see everything that they're doing so I can best sell to them and everything like that. So when it comes to your sponsorship strategy, how can you also enable your sponsors to get that level of analytics as well? Not just seeing how many people clicked on a booth or visited XYZ or this and that, but instead can see the whole user journey for that specific person. That then allows your sponsors to get really deep analytics, so then that way they aren't just massively blasting out an email to 100 attendees, but instead are talking to the exact people that they need to talk to, that are most engaged and everything like that. Big digital marketing trend applied then to a virtual event.
Really cool. So, I mean, it's all about access at the end of the day. And if somebody thinks that they can get access to someone in a more efficient way, that then makes sense to them to invest money into that. So as you were saying before, my audience is 2,000 people, and about a quarter are probably qualified leads. To some people, that might sound like 500 people. Why is that worth $10,000? Well, depending on how much those are worth and what type of stuff you're selling and what kind of access and over what period of time, that can be very valuable, and that can be really efficient for that particular company. So I totally understand and totally agree with everything that you're saying. When you're thinking about someone who is just starting out, not necessarily from an experience perspective, but let's just say you wanted to run DJ Con 2020, and you've never and you aren't necessarily already a thought leader. You have some really good speakers on board. You have a strategy of making sure people will come, but you don't have that track record yet for you to go out to sponsors. So maybe kind of smaller scale, or the first year that something's happening. Are there specific things that you'd suggest people think about, or rabbit holes that you should really be avoiding when it comes to thinking about sponsorship in this plan?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the first things is cold outreach of trying to reach sponsors. I think is a big rabbit hole that you can end up diving down and say, hey, yeah, so Red Bull would be a great sponsor. Let's
reply to me.
Well, yeah, we'll go to LinkedIn. I'll find the marketing person, and that could be really good. But you just have this uphill battle of what's trying to happen. So I think first tip I'd have is try to utilize the existing network you already have. If you're doing DJ Con, you probably have some connections within the DJ world of what's trying to happen. So let's say, for example, you start selling some tickets, or you have some speakers. Talk to them and say, hey, what kind of brands do you know, and this and that. And chances are someone knows somebody that can maybe potentially make a more warm introduction for you to try to get them involved. Again, relationships, I think, can really, really help with that initial sponsorship piece, but it can't be the full way that you're going to do everything, right? But at least get some, case studies. I think one of the big things too is a lot of what I think about too is it's about brands like to align with other brands too. So one thing to think in mind too is when you start to think about your whole sponsorship lineup is that you might start to also get bites that are a little bit smaller, but are for people that you were not necessarily the most proud of that sponsorship. I would not start advertising the smaller sponsorships right away, because big brands want to play with other big brands. And I think that this goes to show when you go on every single website for any service or any company or software company, and you see we work with these logos. In fact, you go to Endless's website, it says, we work with these companies. It's literally a form of persuasion. That's the idea of social proof. So if you can get big names, they'll help attract other big names. But be conscious of your whole lineup, because if you start to post little small sponsors, it makes it look like you really only work with little small sponsors. Well, you might be thinking to yourself, well, I haven't gotten a big sponsor then at all. Well, all you need to do is get a big sponsor to give a little bit of money to be able to then show off that logo. You might not need Red Bull to be your keynote biggest sponsor, but if you can get Red Bull and then the rest of the sponsors are small, no one has to know that Red Bull only give you $1,000, but that they're already invested to be a part of this. So I think that's another thing that's really, really helpful when it comes to getting started. And then I think the last thing that when it comes to getting started with sponsorships too is that think about ways that you can also make it fun for the sponsors too, to make it that they're participating as part of the conference as well. Because if they can help add value into it too, you also sometimes don't necessarily need just the logo and just the money, but think about their testimonial afterwards too, the long-term potential of that sponsor. You know, for example, if you can get Red Bull to give you a quote like, "We doubled revenue because we sponsored at DJCon 2020," that's going to help you so much for future years. So also think long-term when it comes across the board. And I think the last thing I'll add into there too is not necessarily just really just a sponsorship, but don't rely on running your entire event only on sponsorship. If sponsorship's the only way that you're going to make revenue to cover your costs, it's very, very dangerous. Until you start to get that repeatable sales system in place for sponsorships, relying on it can be extra dangerous. That's what we did when we did that Undie Run event. We relied really heavily on sponsorship. We tried to make the event free. And because of it, eventually when sponsorships dried up and no one was interested anymore or whatever it was, the event eventually shut down. But what I would rather do is try to focus on like ticket sales, focus on additional partnerships aside from that, figure out ways that maybe you can monetize the content afterwards rather than just only relying on it. So then that way too, you don't feel the pressure of sponsors being your only revenue source.
I think that's absolutely spot on. I think for a lot of people, it's this distraction. And certainly the ones that we've seen about 5,000 events happening on our platform in the past year. And the ones that do the best with sponsorships aren't the free events. You know, these are in terms of like numbers, when you're talking the numbers game. And this, I guess, is slightly connected to a question I'd love to ask. Traditional events are usually you have to have a certain amount of investment in order to get started. You need to be investing quite a bit. So the sponsorship and the way that you're thinking about engaging with sponsors matters a lot more. You need to be expecting them to pay large amounts because you have also large amounts of costs. And that also will determine the types of sponsors that maybe you're going after for that particular event. With virtual events, certainly what we found is the nichification of particular events mean that it's much cheaper to obviously run events. It's much more worth your time, and you get a smaller but purer audience than maybe some DJCon 2020. It's not DJCon 2020. It's the Yamaha Masterclass series or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I forgive me if that's not a brand that actually does anything with DJs.
You're good.
Anyway, but because of that, you also talked about like making it fun. And certain things that we've seen, and so I'm finally getting my question, I promise, is like how can you engage with sponsors, like have them host a panel, have them have a talk, have them be available for office hours, trying to understand where they flow. Are there like examples that you've seen, particularly when it comes to virtual events that maybe are a bit more niche in focus that you've seen that you're particularly like, that was, innovative or novel?
Yeah, definitely. Remind me about the examples, but I want to tie onto your niche concept too. Is that I think people sometimes get stuck in this idea of thinking they need to reach a mass audience, and I think that even sponsors feel that way too. But reality is that, like, if you look at, for example, I'll just use YouTube as an example. That I was watching a video from Noah Kagan, and he was talking about how Mr. Beast, who's like one of the biggest YouTubers right now, who's getting like multi-millions on every video he does, and he's making millions of dollars off of AdSense and all these things like that. And it was like the breakdown of his business, but it was funny, he talks about like, hey, what is his cost per impression, right? The cost per 1,000 people seeing one of his videos. And it was like $7. And then Noah said, well, it's really interesting because his is actually higher, that Noah Kagan's cost per impression is like $25 per 1,000. Well, what would lead to it being, 3 times as much? Noah Kagan doesn't have anywhere near as many. You guys probably never even heard Noah Kagan before. But the reason why he gets more is because the brands that are trying to align with Noah Kagan know exactly who his audience is and the people he's trying to reach. When you're trying to reach Mr. Beast levels, you're like, basically have to be like a very generalist product. You can't just sell them only on like, hey, we want you to look at this one productivity journal. Like half his audience are like, I don't care about productivity journals. They have to sell them like mass things like software or an iPhone or something like that. Whereas Noah Kagan, he's all about productivity and business and entrepreneurship. He can say, hey, a sponsor who's looking to sell this, standing mat that makes it when you have a standing desk, you flow a little bit better. Well, that kind of audience will pay way more to get in front of that very specific audience as well. And I think the nichification creates this huge example. So back to your
Great.
question of examples, I kind of give a half example. It's not really
No, we're
related
good.
to
We're
this,
good.
but I think where I'm seeing a lot of success in is that nicheification. To go back to it too, is that the events that are coming out and saying like, here's a very specific problem we're trying to solve with our event, and here's the very specific people we're trying to reach. And me as an attendee, that's what I want to go to too. So I think that's also something. In addition to thinking, hey, as the sponsor, how do you or how do I think like a sponsor so that I know what their objectives are and they're talk to them about strategy, but also think about your attendees too. What do they really care about? And that's where attendee persona building is really, really important. And if you just Google how to create an attendee persona or just go on our blog, we have a whole blog series all about attendee personas you can check out. But creating these fictional representation of your attendees, you'll know what they want to have too. So for example, Noah Kagan knows his audience, so he knows what kind of ads he can get them in front of. But if you really understand and do these niche kind of audiences, that's what I want to go to too. I don't want to go to, productivity con, or no, let's not use productivity con because that might actually be something I would want to go to. But let's see, I don't want to go to like Entrepreneur Con 2020. It's just too broad.
Yeah.
You get this broad sense of companies that are just starting, and then you have companies that are doing really, really well. There's too much broadness in between that. But if I could go to a conference that talked about companies my exact size that are trying to accomplish the same goals of what I'm trying to achieve, I'll go there. A, I'll pay probably more money per ticket for that because it's really going to help me. But also B, then I'm probably going to want to engage with those specific sponsors. You might see that there's going to be companies like HubSpot there. You might see companies like, I'm trying to think of brands that I really like Gong is a great software company that I really like. Maybe there's a productivity entrepreneur journal or something like that. That's really helpful. I keep using that as an example. But I think those kind of sponsors, then I'm like really going to want to engage with them because they're already brands that I'm kind of aligned with, but also I'm already interested in too. So then it lets you drive that value of what's going to happen. Other events that I think have been really, really successful as well is ones that really align already with an audience that is kind of already familiar with them too. So I'll use this as an example. Like, I don't think there's very many times where like I'm watching a YouTube video or something like that, and I love YouTube, so I think that's why I use it as an example so much. But there's not many times when I'm watching a YouTube video or going to an event and I hear a brand that I've never heard of. And I go, oh my gosh, I'm falling in love, I'm ready to go buy them right now. What it takes is those additional impressions a couple times in front of them, right? We've always talked about repetition in marketing. But I think that if you can somehow figure out a way to align with brands that are already marketing to your existing attendee personas, you're going to have so much more success across the board. So I'll use the example of, let's see, what kind of event can we use as an example? I haven't gotten a chance to attend many events. Okay, here's a great example. I attended actually a virtual music festival put on by Matt Zoe. He's like an EDM artist, I think medium size or so. And he did a concert inside of a Minecraft world. And I don't play Minecraft. And I don't know, I only know Minecraft because we produced their events for a while. But I was interested to go because I was like, what could a concert look like in this blocky, two-dimensional, kind of low-res world? And I also really love Mad So. So I went to the event, and the sponsors of the event were the music labels, which makes sense because they're the ones who are trying to promote the artists that are going to be there. But one interesting sponsor that I stick in my mind is MSI. They're like a computer parts brand. They make motherboards and laptops and all that sort of stuff. I think that was a really good sponsorship because likely the people that are going into a Minecraft world are already gamers and interested in Minecraft, and they're aligning with that audience to say, hey, MSI, come check this out and all that sort of things. I don't buy MSI products. I don't own any. I don't think I own any MSI products. But I remember that sponsorship, and I remember that they aligned with an event that I really believed in, and that they wanted to support this idea of alternative experiences in the interwebs. And I bet you right now, if someone said, hey, I see this MSI laptop, I wouldn't down talk their brand in any sort of way. I would probably be like, yeah, MSI is great. And I think that's an ultimate goal of what the sponsorship is. Yeah, and like imagine if I actually needed a laptop right now, or I needed the product that MSI had, and I was on the fence about buying this one thing, or I was thinking about buying an MSI product, and now I just saw it again, and I saw they align with Madzo, I'd be like, man, they're so cool, they're aligned with Madzo, like, I gotta support this brand across board. And that's a very soft, they were like, I think they got a booth in the virtual world, and they put their logo on a couple places, and they were on the ads. It was a very basic sponsorship. It wasn't even designed like, they weren't giving out emails, they weren't trying to do, they didn't have people walking around trying to convince you to do MSI. They were probably could have activated way even more. But I think that it shows that aligning with the existing audience who might already be on the trajectory of buying to help push them across the board is also what can be successful.
So thank you very much for that. That was an amazing example. I know we're kind of over time. One more, if I may, about
Always.
hybrid events.
Yes.
I'd love to get your take on hybrid events. Obviously, Hey Summit is a virtual summit platform, but a lot of before pre-COVID, a lot of in-person events actually were using us to like extend the experience for those who weren't able to come. But
Definitely.
people weren't really thinking of it in the way that they're thinking of it now. So,
Sure.
next 12 months, what are you kind of seeing? And also from a sponsorship side, like the idea of hybrid events, how do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I define hybrid events as when the virtual audience exists and also the in-person audience exists, and they're blurred between each other, where they get to have the same level experience whether you're in person or virtual, but you don't feel like a fly on the wall. And I think pre-2020 hybrid events were, hey, we're going to do like a general session and we'll just throw on a live stream, and they might just like throw it on Hey Summit and be like, and we're good, and all those audience questions come in. Maybe they were good about getting those questions in front of the audience, but they were delayed and they didn't get to all of them, and people felt like they were just watching. The presenter didn't even make eye contact with the camera, right? Like all those things like that. But now moving forward, we have to avoid that, make that experience tighter with each other as well, and go to that next level. So when it comes to sponsorships for hybrid events, hybrid's the future, by the way, everybody, because whether people are going 100% virtual or going 100% in person, there's still going to be this audience that's going to say, I don't feel comfortable going, or I don't necessarily see the value. I can't afford to, right? I can only go to one conference a year, but I can attend 10 virtual conferences. Or I just want to see that one speaker go. I don't want to fly all the way to San Diego just to watch one speaker. So I think when it comes to hybrid and sponsorships within hybrid, I think that it's important to figure out a way that you're, again, not just looking at them as two separate audiences. And I think one thing that we might have to think about, and you're actually the first person to ask me about this question so far this year, so that's why I'm going to give you a really fresh answer, is I think that when it comes to hybrid sponsorships too, there might be some sponsors that more align with virtual as they do on the in-person side of things. But I think that when you're selling it, you have to be selling two parts of a whole. You can't just say, we're going to put your logo on somewhere and it'll be virtual and in person. But instead say something like, we're going to give you a booth where you can show off your products and everything like that. But we're also going to do this XYZ experience for the virtual audience. Or maybe figure out a way to then tie in the in-person in with the virtual in terms of that experience that's then getting created. But ultimately, I think that's going to be really, really important that you make sure you track all the analytics across the board too for everything, because that's going to be one of the easiest things to do, is just to like let each of the analytics go, because virtual is easy right now. We can track everything, everyone's clicks and everything like that. But when you go in person, to track what booths everybody went to, you're going to be thinking about like RFID tags, all those things like that. I'm starting to get in probably more advanced world now. But I think just think about the way to meld those two audiences together and consider them as one single audience rather than as two distinct separate audiences.
I think that's a great point to finish on. Obviously, these are people. They're not like users or even
IP
just
addresses. Yeah,
their IP addresses. Like they're people, and they're customers, and they're individuals. But understanding the mechanics of how those people are, and understanding what it is that they're wanting to get out of it, it all kind of goes in together. And there's nuance definitely there, but there's also like sometimes you just got to get a bit basic. So thank you so much, Will, for joining me today. And if you're either watching this live or you're watching it on the replay, please make sure that you're connecting with Will. You can find him on all the socials. Twitter, it's Will Curran. Instagram, it's Will Curran as well. Facebook, he's on Facebook. The Will Curran. On LinkedIn, and specifically,
if you just Google Will Curran, you'll find me everywhere.
Make sure you go to helloendless.com and visit his site, and make sure to follow all of his podcasts. I think in the information for this video, we list all of those podcasts on there. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all at Hello Endless. And thanks again, Will, for making the time.
Always happy to, Rob. It's a pleasure, and I love working with you guys. So yeah, let me know how I can help. And anyone out there, just don't hesitate. willcurran.com, reach out. I'm happy to help. I literally always happy to help anybody in any sort of way. And yeah, definitely check out the content. We got our trends guide coming out. Yeah, and yeah, always ask me how I can help.
Right there on Sure. Thanks so much, Will.
Awesome.
Have a
Thank you,
great
Rob.
day. Bye.